The howling wind carried dust across the plains as Zeke Blackburn sat alone in his weathered cabin, staring at the letter he'd received just hours before. His fiancée, Eliza, would be arriving in 3 days, much sooner than he'd expected. In the dim glow of lantern light, the 30-year-old rancher glanced around at the dismal state of his homestead and knew he needed help before she arrived. Montana Territory, 1876. Zeke had spent 2 years building his cattle ranch on the harsh frontier, sending letters back east to the woman who'd agreed to marry him sight unseen. Now, with her imminent arrival, panic rose in his chest. The cabin was filthy. His cooking consisted of burnt beans and tough jerky, and he hadn't properly cleaned in months. A man accustomed to handling ornery steers and outrunning bandits found himself terrified by the prospect of disappointing the woman who'd traveled across the country to be his wife. The next morning, Zeke rode hard into the nearest town, Silver Creek, a dusty collection of wooden structures with false fronts pretending to be grander than they were. The saloon was his destination, not for whiskey but for information. If anyone knew of someone who could help him prepare, it would be Rosie, the saloon owner who knew everyone's business within 50 miles. A cook, Rosie repeated, wiping down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. Just for one night to impress your mail-order bride. Her weathered face cracked into an amused smile. Zeke adjusted his hat, embarrassment coloring his sun-bronzed face. She ain't exactly mail order. We've been corresponding for years. Met her brother during the war. He cleared his throat. Just need someone to help make the place presentable. I want her first impression to be good. Rosie's eyes softened. Well, as luck would have it, there's a young woman who just arrived on yesterday's stage. Tess Nelson. Looking for work before she continues west. Mighty fine cook from what I hear. Been helping at the boarding house since she arrived. You think she'd be willing to ride out to my place? It's a good 2 hours from town. For the right price, I imagine she would. She's saving for her journey. Cabin's over at Mrs. Hawkins' boarding house. An hour later, Zeke found himself awkwardly waiting in the tidy parlor of the boarding house, hat in hand. When Tess Nelson entered the room, he wasn't prepared for the woman before him. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 25, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple but clean, and there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who had faced hardship and survived. "Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Yes, madam. I understand you're looking for work." She assessed him with clear blue eyes. "I am. Mrs. Hawkins mentioned you need a cook for a special occasion." Zeke explained his situation, feeling increasingly foolish as he admitted his inability to prepare his home for his fiancée. To her credit, Tess didn't laugh. "I can help," she said simply. "My fee is $5 for the day's work, plus safe transport there and back." It was more than he'd expected to pay, but desperation made him nod. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow if that suits." "It does." Her businesslike demeanor softened slightly. "Your fiancée is a lucky woman, Mr. Blackburn. Not many men would go to such trouble." The next morning they set out just as the sun was breaking over the eastern hills. Tess rode side saddle on a horse Zeke had borrowed from the livery, her small bundle of cooking supplies and a change of clothes tied securely behind her. The journey was mostly silent, save for occasional comments about the landscape or a passing deer. "What takes you further west?" Zeke finally asked as they crossed a shallow creek, the water splashing around the horse's legs. Tess adjusted her bonnet against the strengthening sun. "My brother. He's in California, has a small orchard near Sacramento. Wrote that he could use my help since his wife passed last winter." "I'm sorry to hear that," Zeke said, genuinely. It's good of you to go to him. Family is all we really have in this world, Mr. Blackburn." Something in her tone suggested she knew this truth too well. They arrived at Zeke's ranch just before midday. It wasn't much a sturdy log cabin, a small barn where he kept his 2 horses and milk cow, a chicken coop, and the beginnings of what would someday be proper grazing land for his small herd of cattle. Tess took it all in with an appraising eye but made no comment. The inside of the cabin was another matter. Single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner covered with rumpled blankets, and cooking implements hanging from pegs or scattered across surfaces. Dust covered everything, and the lingering smell of bachelor living hung in the air. Tess set her bundle down and rolled up her sleeves. "Well, Mr. Blackburn, I can see why you sought help," he winced. "It's not usually quite this bad." The lie hung between them, and her raised eyebrow told him she wasn't fooled. "I'll need water, lots of it, and if you have any lavender or sage growing nearby, that would be helpful." Zeke nodded, relieved to have direction. "There's a pump out back. And I believe there's wild sage on the western slope." For the next several hours, Tess transformed his cabin. She scrubbed every surface until the wood gleamed, beat the dust from his bedding and hung it in the sun, organized his meager kitchen supplies, and swept the floor until not a speck of dirt remained. All the while, she had Zeke fetching water, gathering herbs, and moving furniture. By late afternoon, the cabin was unrecognizable. Fresh sage and wildflowers sat in a jar on the table, the windows sparkled, and the floor had been scrubbed until the wood grain showed through. Tess had even repaired a tear in his bed quilt with neat, tiny stitches. "Now for the cooking," she announced, appraising the provisions he had on hand. "Your fiancé arrives tomorrow," "day after," Zeke corrected. "Stage gets in around noon," Tess nodded. "Then I'll prepare some things that will keep. A stew that you can reheat, bread that will stay fresh if wrapped properly, and I'll show you how to make a simple but decent breakfast." As she worked, combining ingredients with confident movements, the cabin began to fill with aromas Zeke hadn't smelled since his mother was a live, rich beef broth, fresh bread, and herbs. He found himself watching her hands, mesmerized by their sure movements and the gentle way they handled even the most mundane tasks. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, helping her knead dough at her instruction. "My mother taught me. Then I cooked for a large household in Boston for several years." She guided his hands, showing him how to turn the dough properly. "Not so rough. Bread responds better to a gentle touch." Evening fell and the cabin was transformed. Tess served a portion of the stew she'd made, along with fresh bread still warm from the Dutch oven. They sat at the now gleaming table, the light of the lantern casting a warm glow over the meal. "This is remarkable," Zeke said after his first bite. "I haven't had food this good since." He trailed off, thinking of home and family long gone. "Your mother," Tess guessed quietly. He nodded, surprised by her perception. "Been on my own since I was 17. Never did learn proper cooking. Yet you've managed to build all this." She gestured to the cabin and the land beyond. "It's impressive, Mr. Blackburn." "Zeke," he corrected. "After all this, you might as well use my given name." A small smile touched her lips. "Zeke, then." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound besides the occasional pop from the fireplace. "Tell me about your fiancée," Tess said eventually. "What's her name?" "Eliza." "Eliza Grant." Zeke shifted in his seat. "We met through letters. Her brother served with me during the war. Good man, died at Gettysburg. I promised him I'd look after his sister if anything happened." He stirred his stew absently. "The letters just continued after that. Eventually, she agreed to come west and marry me. You've never met in person. Once, briefly, at her brother's funeral. He looked uncomfortable. She was grieving. I doubt she remembers much about me. Tess considered this. It takes courage to journey across the country to marry someone you barely know. She's a brave woman, lost her parents young, then her brother. Been working as a seamstress in Philadelphia. He glanced around the cabin. I hope this will be enough for her. A woman doesn't travel this far for luxury, Tess said softly. She comes for the man and the life they'll build together. Something in her tone made Zeke look at her more closely. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. You sound like you speak from experience, he ventured. She busied herself with clearing the plates. I was engaged once. He went west to make his fortune, promised to send for me. A tight smile. 3 years later, I received a letter saying he'd married someone else. I'm sorry, Zeke said, meaning it. It was for the best. She straightened her shoulders. I should show you how to reheat this stew properly for when your bride arrives. The evening passed with Tess instructing Zeke on basic cooking techniques and how to maintain the cleanliness of the cabin. When it grew late, Zeke insisted she take his bed while he would sleep in the barn. That's not necessary, she protested. I can make a pallet by the fire. My mother would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I let a lady sleep on the floor while I took a bed, he said firmly. The barn is plenty comfortable. I've slept there many times during calving season. Reluctantly, she agreed, and Zeke gathered what he needed for the night. At the door, he paused. Thank you, Tess, not just for the cooking and cleaning, but for, he gestured vaguely, for making this place feel like it could be a home. She smiled, genuine warmth reaching her eyes for the first time. You're welcome, Zeke. I hope Eliza appreciates what you've built here. With that, he left for the barn, strangely reluctant to leave the cabin, and the woman who had transformed it. Morning brought clear skies and a breeze that carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. Zeke returned to the cabin to find Tess already awake and preparing breakfast. The sight of her moving comfortably around his kitchen, hair loosely braided over one shoulder, caused an unexpected tightness in his chest. I thought I'd show you how to make a proper breakfast, she said when she noticed him. Simple enough that you won't struggle, but nice enough to impress. They ate together, and Zeke found himself asking more questions about her life, her childhood in Ohio, her years in Boston, her dreams for California. She answered easily, but always steered the conversation back to practical matters about the cabin or his ranch. After breakfast, Tess packed her few belongings. I've left detailed instructions for reheating the stew and keeping the bread fresh. There's also a berry pie in the cupboard that will keep for 2 days. You've done more than I asked, Zeke said, reaching for his wallet. Worth every penny and more. He handed her the agreed-upon $5, then added 3 more, for the extra effort. She started to protest, but he shook his head. Please, you've given me a fighting chance at making a good impression. Reluctantly, she accepted the money, tucking it into her pocket. I hope everything goes well with Eliza. They rode back to town mostly in silence, both aware that their brief acquaintance was ending. The morning sun warmed their backs and meadowlarks called from the tall grass beside the trail. It was a perfect Montana day, the kind that made Zeke fall in love with this harsh but beautiful territory. As they approached Silver Creek, Tess finally broke the silence. You've built something special out there, Zeke. It might not be fancy, but it's honest and strong. Like you, I imagine. He felt his face warm at the compliment, still rough around the edges. The best things usually are. She smiled, then added more seriously, I hope Eliza sees that. They parted ways at the boarding house, Tess declining his offer to escort her inside. Thank you for the work, she said formally, extending her hand. Zeke took it, surprised by the roughness of her palm against his own calloused hand. Not a lady's hand, but a working woman's. "Safe travels to California," he said. "Your brother is lucky to have you coming." For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of paths that might have crossed differently in another life. Then she nodded and turned away, disappearing into the boarding house. Zeke spent the next day preparing for Eliza's arrival, following Tess's instructions to keep the cabin clean and the food ready. He even picked wildflowers and arranged them in a jar as Tess had done. Yet as he moved around the space, he found himself thinking of Tess's efficient movements and quiet competence rather than the woman who would soon be his wife. When the stage arrived the following day, Zeke waited nervously at the station, hat in hand. 3 passengers disembarked: an elderly couple and a thin woman in a fashionable travel suit, her blonde hair arranged neatly beneath a feathered hat. Eliza Grant. She looked exactly as he remembered from the funeral, if somewhat older and more careworn. "Miss Grant," he said, stepping forward. "Welcome to Montana." She regarded him with nervous gray eyes. "Mr. Blackburn, thank you for meeting me." Their exchange was awkward, formal. Zeke helped with her luggage, 2 large trunks and a carpet bag, and assisted her onto his wagon for the journey to the ranch. The conversation during the ride was stilted, with long silences broken only by her occasional questions about the landscape or his comments about local landmarks. By the time they reached the cabin, Zeke's stomach was in knots. Eliza had said little, but her pinched expression when they passed a particularly ramshackle homestead had spoken volumes. What would she think of his modest ranch? To his surprise, she smiled when she saw the cabin. "It's larger than I expected," she said, allowing him to help her down from the wagon. Inside, her reaction was even more positive. "How lovely," she exclaimed, touching the wildflowers on the table. "And something smells wonderful." "I prepared a stew," Zeke said, omitting the fact that Tess had actually made it. "Should be ready to eat once you've had a chance to refresh yourself." Eliza moved around the cabin, inspecting her new home with curious eyes. "It's very clean," she remarked. "I confess I expected a bachelor's quarters to be somewhat less orderly." Zeke smiled awkwardly. "I wanted to make a good impression." As they sat down to the meal, Eliza's posture gradually relaxed. She complimented the food enthusiastically, seeming genuinely impressed. "I never imagined you would be such a fine cook," she said between bites of the tender beef stew. "There's pie for dessert," he told her, feeling increasingly guilty about taking credit for Tess's work. After the meal, they sat by the fire, the awkwardness returning as they searched for conversation. Eliza was polite but reserved, answering his questions about her journey with brief responses. When the hour grew late, Zeke showed her to the bed, explaining that he would sleep in the barn until they were properly married. "The preacher comes through town every 3rd Sunday," he explained. "That's just over a week from now." She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "That will give us time to become better acquainted." In the barn that night, lying on a bed of straw, Zeke stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and tried to reconcile the day's events. Eliza was exactly as her letters had portrayed her: proper, educated, and determined. She would make a suitable wife, and he would provide for her as he had promised her brother. Yet something felt hollow about their interaction, lacking the ease he had felt with Tess in just one day. The following morning, Zeke awoke to find Eliza attempting to restart the fire in the stove. Her frustration was evident in the tense line of her shoulders. "Let me help with that," he offered, quickly taking over. "Thank you," she said, stepping back. "I'm afraid I have much to learn about country living." "It'll come with time," he assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Breakfast was a simple affair of coffee and leftover bread. Eliza picked at her food, her expression neutral but her eyes constantly moving around the cabin, assessing. "I thought I might show you the ranch today," Zeke suggested. "It's not much yet, but there's potential." "I would like that," she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As they walked the property, Zeke pointed out his plans for expansion: more grazing land, a larger barn, perhaps a proper garden. Eliza nodded at appropriate intervals, but her tight grip on her parasol and the way she carefully avoided muddy patches told him more than her words. "It's very rustic," she said finally, as they stood looking at the small herd of cattle in the distance. "It's a start," Zeke admitted. "Takes time to build something worthwhile out here." "Of course." She turned to face him, her expression suddenly earnest. "Mr. Blackburn, Zeke, I want to be honest with you. This is all very different from what I'm accustomed to. I knew it would be, of course, but seeing it." She gestured around them. "It's quite an adjustment." "I understand," he said, though his heart sank. "It's a hard life at first." "Yes," she agreed, then squared her shoulders. "But I made a commitment. I intend to honor it." Her words should have reassured him, but instead they left him cold. Honor and commitment were fine qualities, but they weren't the foundation of the marriage he had hoped for. The day passed slowly, each of them circling the other with cautious politeness. By evening, when Zeke reheated the last of Tess's stew, the strain was evident in the silence that stretched between them. "This stew is remarkable," Eliza said again. "Truly, I had no idea you were so accomplished in the kitchen." The guilt that had been building finally overflowed. "I need to confess something," Zeke said, setting down his spoon. "I didn't make this stew or clean the cabin or bake the bread." Eliza's eyebrows rose. "I don't understand." "I hired someone to help prepare for your arrival, a woman passing through town." He couldn't meet her eyes. "I wanted everything to be perfect when you got here, and I'm not much of a cook or housekeeper." Instead of the anger or disappointment he expected, Eliza laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "Oh, thank heavens. I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake in coming if you expected me to maintain such standards in cooking." Zeke looked up, surprised. "You're not upset for hiring help?" "No, it was thoughtful of you to want to make a good impression." She smiled ruefully. "Though I must admit, I'm relieved to know you won't be comparing my cooking to this standard. I'm a mediocre cook at best." The tension broke, and for the first time they shared a real laugh. The evening improved after that, with conversation flowing more naturally as they discovered they could be honest with each other. Yet, as Zeke again made his way to the barn for the night, an image of Tess moving confidently around his kitchen kept returning to his mind. The next few days established a routine. Eliza tried her hand at cooking, producing edible if uninspiring meals. She was willing to learn about ranch life but clearly uncomfortable with many aspects of it. The mud frightened her, the livestock made her nervous, and the isolation weighed on her. "Do you visit town often?" she asked on the third day as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Every couple of weeks for supplies," Zeke answered. "More often when we have good weather." "I see." Her fingers worried at the fabric of her skirt. "I was thinking, perhaps I could find work there. As a seamstress, I'm quite skilled." Zeke turned to her, surprised. "You don't need to work, Eliza. The ranch provides enough." "It's not about need." She met his gaze directly. "It's about purpose and company, I suppose. I'm used to being around people." Understanding dawned. "You're lonely out here." "A bit," she admitted. "It's very quiet." Zeke nodded slowly, seeing his home through her eyes: isolated, primitive, lacking the social connections she was accustomed to. "We could visit town this weekend," he offered. "Meet some of the folks there." Relief crossed her face. "I would like that very much." Saturday found them in Silver Creek, Eliza in her best dress and Zeke uncomfortably clean-shaven. He introduced her to the shopkeepers and townsfolk, and she charmed them with her Eastern manners and genuine interest in their lives. At Rosie's suggestion, they attended a small gathering at the church that evening, not a formal service, but a social for the scattered ranchers and townspeople to connect. It was there that Zeke saw Tess again. She was helping serve refreshments, her practical dress exchanged for a simple blue one that brought out the color of her eyes. She noticed him at the same moment, a flash of surprise crossing her face before she composed herself and approached. "Mr. Blackburn," she said formally. "How nice to see you again. Miss Nelson." He felt suddenly awkward, acutely aware of Eliza beside him. "May I introduce my fiancée, Miss Eliza Grant? Eliza, this is Miss Tess Nelson." The two women exchanged pleasantries, Eliza none the wiser about Tess's role in preparing the cabin. As they talked, Zeke couldn't help but notice the differences between them. Eliza refined and proper, Tess practical and straightforward. Both beautiful in their own ways, but as different as silk and canvas. "Miss Nelson helped at the boarding house when I first arrived," Eliza was saying. "Mrs. Hawkins mentioned you're traveling to California." "Yes," Tess confirmed. "My brother is there. I'll be leaving on Monday's stage." "So soon?" The words escaped Zeke before he could stop them. Tess met his eyes briefly. "I've saved enough for the journey now. There's no reason to delay." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Zeke found himself watching Tess as she moved through the gathering, easy in her interactions with everyone from the banker to the blacksmith's children. She belonged in this frontier world in a way that Eliza, for all her efforts, did not. Later, as they drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Eliza was unusually quiet. "Did you enjoy the gathering?" Zeke asked, wondering if the evening had helped her feel less isolated. "Yes," she said slowly. "Everyone was very kind." She paused, then added, "Miss Nelson seems quite capable." "She is," Zeke agreed, keeping his tone neutral. "She's the one who prepared the cabin, isn't she?" Zeke glanced at her, surprised. "How did you know?" Eliza's smile was sad in the moonlight. "The way you looked at her. And at the cabin that first day, you said it smelled like home. That wasn't a sentiment I'd expect from you about your own cooking." Heat rose in Zeke's face, though whether from embarrassment at being caught in his deception or at the implication about his feelings for Tess, he couldn't say. "I should have been honest from the start." "Yes," Eliza agreed quietly, "we both should have been." Something in her tone made him pull the wagon to a stop. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I came west because I had nowhere else to go. The shop where I worked closed and I couldn't find other employment. Your letters offered security and I convinced myself that would be enough." She looked at him directly. "But I don't think it is, not for either of us." "Eliza, please let me finish." Her voice was steady now. "You're a good man, Zeke. You've honored your promise to my brother beyond what anyone could expect. But I don't think either of us will find happiness in a marriage based on obligation rather than love." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps we should reconsider our arrangement." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I saw how you looked at Miss Nelson. That's how a man should look at the woman he intends to marry." "I barely know her," Zeke protested, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "Yet she makes your cabin smell like home," Eliza said gently. "That's more telling than days of polite conversation between us." They sat in silence for several minutes, the horses stamping restlessly in their traces. "What will you do?" Zeke finally asked. "Mrs. Hawkins mentioned they need help at the boarding house, and Rosie said several women in town might want sewing done." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "I can make my way, Zeke. Perhaps not in Philadelphia, but here, where skills matter more than connections. You'd stay in Silver Creek. For now. It seems a friendly place, and far enough from Philadelphia that my past won't follow me. Zeke absorbed this, realizing how little he truly knew about the woman he'd been prepared to marry. "The cabin is yours if you want it," he offered. "I could stay in town until you find your feet." She shook her head. "That's your home. You've built it with your own hands." A small smile touched her lips. "Besides, I think there might be someone else who belongs there with you." The next day they returned to town, Eliza's trunks loaded in the wagon. The decision, once made, brought relief to both of them. Mrs. Hawkins was delighted to have Eliza's help at the boarding house, and several of the women they'd met at the gathering immediately expressed interest in her sewing services. "You'll write to let me know how you're getting on?" Zeke asked as he helped carry her trunks inside. "Of course." Eliza hesitated, then impulsively hugged him. "Thank you for understanding. I hope you find your happiness, Zeke." After ensuring Eliza was comfortably settled, Zeke found himself walking toward the stagecoach office. The clerk confirmed what Tess had said. She was booked on Monday's stage heading west. Zeke spent the night at the town's small hotel, restless and uncertain. By morning, he had made his decision. He went to the boarding house, not to see Eliza but to find Tess. He caught her just as she was leaving to run an errand, her simple bonnet framing her face in the morning light. "Zeke," she said, surprised, "I thought you'd be back at your ranch by now." "Things have changed," he said, suddenly nervous. "May I walk with you?" She nodded, curiosity evident in her expression as they fell into step together down the town's main street. "Eliza and I have decided not to marry," he said without preamble. Tess stopped walking. "I'm sorry to hear that. Was it because of the cabin? Because she learned you hired help?" "No," Zeke said with a small laugh. "Though she did figure that out. It was because we both realized we were marrying for the wrong reasons." He met her eyes directly. "She said I looked at you the way a man should look at the woman he intends to marry." A flush crept up Tess's cheeks. "She said that, she did. And she was right." Zeke took a deep breath. "I know you're planning to leave for California, and I have no right to ask you to change your plans. But I wanted you to know that in one day you made my cabin feel more like a home than it has in 2 years." Tess was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "What are you saying, Zeke?" "I'm saying that if you wanted to stay not as a cook or a housekeeper, but as yourself, I'd like the chance to see if what I'm feeling might grow into something real." He rushed on before his courage failed him. "I know it's sudden and maybe foolish, but sometimes you just know when something feels right. Like the smell of home," she said softly. "Exactly like that." A slow smile spread across her face. "My brother's orchard will still be there in a few months. Perhaps I could write and tell him I'll be delayed." Hope surged in Zeke's chest. "You'll stay?" "Not at your cabin," she clarified quickly. "That would hardly be proper, but in town, perhaps, for a while. To see if what you're feeling might be something I could feel too." It wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. And as they continued their walk through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Zeke felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Tess continued to work at the boarding house while Zeke divided his time between the ranch and town. They saw each other regularly for meals at the hotel restaurant, walks along the creek that gave the town its name, or quiet conversations on the boarding house porch. To Zeke's surprise, Eliza became a friend to both of them. Free from the pressure of an unwanted engagement, she flourished in Silver Creek, her sewing skills in high demand and her Eastern manners earning her the respect of the townsfolk. She even began teaching the shopkeepers' children to read in the evenings, finding purpose in sharing her education. "You two make much more sense together," she told Zeke and Tess one evening as the three of them shared a meal at the hotel. Anyone with eyes can see it, and it was true. With each conversation, each shared laugh, the connection between Zeke and Tess deepened. He learned about her dreams for her brother's orchard, her love of cooking that had begun in her mother's kitchen, and the strength that had carried her through disappointment and loss. She, in turn, came to understand his quiet determination, his sense of honor, and the loneliness that had driven him to reach out to a woman he barely knew in hopes of building a family. A month after Eliza's arrival in Silver Creek, Zeke invited Tess to visit his ranch properly, not as a hired cook, but as a guest. Rosie's daughter chaperoned, her teenage chatter filling the wagon as they made the journey. Seeing the cabin through Tess's eyes this time not as a job to be done, but as a potential home, Zeke felt both pride and nervousness. The place had changed in small ways since her first visit. He'd added curtains to the windows, built a proper bookshelf, and started a vegetable garden that was showing the first green shoots of spring. "You've been busy," Tess remarked as she explored the improvements. "Trying to make it more of a home and less of a bachelor's shack," he admitted. They spent the day showing Rosie's daughter the ranch, the new calves in the field, the chicken coop where fluffy chicks now scurried after their mother, the stream that provided clear, cold water year-round. As the day waned, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. "I can see why you love it here," Tess said, her voice soft in the evening quiet. "It's beautiful in a wild way." "Not too isolated for you?" Zeke asked, remembering Eliza's concerns. Tess considered this. "It's peaceful, and town is close enough for company when needed." She smiled at him. "The right company makes all the difference." 2 more months passed, seasons shifting from spring to summer. Tess continued to delay her journey to California, her letters to her brother explaining that she had found reasons to stay in Montana, at least for now. On a warm July evening, Zeke took her on a picnic to a hilltop overlooking his land. The grass was tall and dotted with wildflowers, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. "I've been thinking," he said as they sat on a blanket, the remains of their meal packed away. "A dangerous pastime," Tess teased, but her eyes were warm. "I've been thinking that I don't want you to go to California." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Not now, not ever if I'm being honest." Tess's breath caught. "Zeke, I love you, Tess. It happened fast and unexpected, but I've never been more certain of anything." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. I know you have plans, family waiting for you, but I wanted you to know where I stand." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I've already decided," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wrote to my brother last week. Told him I'd found my home here." Joy surged through Zeke. "You're staying, if you'll have me," she smiled through her tears. "I love you too, you know. Have since that day you came looking for a cook and found me instead." He pulled her close, his kiss tender but filled with promise. When they parted, both breathless, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because you need security or I need a cook, but because we belong together." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed in Silver Creek's small church on a Sunday in August, the building overflowing with townsfolk and ranchers from the surrounding area. Eliza stood as Tess's maid of honor, her genuine happiness for the couple evident in her beaming smile. "She makes the cabin smell like home," Eliza whispered to Zeke just before the ceremony began. "I'm so glad you found each other." The wedding celebration continued long into the evening, with music and dancing spilling out into the town's main street. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the dirt road, Zeke pulled his new wife away from the festivities. "Ready to go home?" he asked, helping her into the flower-decorated wagon. Tess's smile was radiant as she looked at the man she had traveled so far to find, though neither of them had known it at the time. "I've been home since the moment I met you," she said. "The cabin is just where we hang our hats." They drove beneath a canopy of stars, the road to their ranch illuminated by moonlight and the warm glow of their shared future. The cabin waited in the distance, no longer just a structure of logs and stone, but the beginning of their life together, a home built on love rather than convenience, on choice rather than obligation. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the cabin changed with the seasons. Tess's touch was everywhere, in the colorful quilts on their bed, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the constant aroma of good food that welcomed Zeke home after long days with the cattle. They added a room for the child they hoped would come, and Zeke built a larger kitchen where Tess could indulge her love of cooking. Eliza remained in Silver Creek, eventually opening a small school with the banker's encouragement and financial backing. She found her own happiness not in marriage, but in the purpose her teaching brought her, and the community that embraced her skills and intelligence. Tess's brother came to visit the following summer, his approval of his sister's choice evident in the way he and Zeke immediately formed a bond. He returned to California with promises to visit again, perhaps even to settle nearby if the right opportunity arose. One evening, as winter settled over the land with a blanket of snow, Zeke and Tess sat before the fire in their expanded cabin. Her head rested on his shoulder, her hand absently stroking the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "You ever think about how close we came to missing each other?" Tess asked, watching the flames dance. "If I hadn't needed work that day, if you hadn't needed a cook." "I think some things are meant to be," Zeke said, covering her hand with his own. "One way or another, we would have found each other." Tess smiled, content in the knowledge that the long journey that had brought her to this place, this man, and this life had been worth every step. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in pristine white, while inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and the unmistakable scent of home.